Well, thanks for the introduction. Let me also share my slides I have here. Should be this one. Let's see. This should be it. So I think I'm looking at the screen, and I think the slide is visible, and I'm there on the side as well. So let me start. Yeah, thank you so much for this introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you virtually. Yeah, so indeed, my name is Marcel Bogers. I am a professor at Eindhoven University of Technology. I've been invited to tell you a little bit about open innovation from a research perspective, as a concept that I think has resonated a lot with industry and practice and policy as well. So I just want to give a bit of an overview. What do we know roughly about this concept, and where may we go in terms of research and practice as well. So that is my aim for today. Just a few more words about myself. So indeed, currently working in Eindhoven, the University of Technology, where I did originally study, but I also took a little detour. I did my PhD in Switzerland at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, and also spent more than 10 years working at different universities in Denmark, and also had the pleasures of some visiting positions in Italy as well, which always was a great pleasure. I'm very much looking forward to being there in person, hopefully someday soon. My main research domain is open innovation, which I have studied from, say, different perspectives and different levels of analysis, ranging from individual level micro foundations to business models to ecosystems. And what I like about the introduction that we just heard is that also, the importance of thinking about open and collaborative innovation in the context of grand societal challenges is also very important. So I'm happy to hear about that interest as well. So when I talk about open innovation, I often like to start with this one quote here, which basically, for me, is quite a strong way of talk about the importance of openness in innovation processes. So when you look at Henry Chesbroug's original book in 2003, somewhere in the back in the footnote, there's this quote hidden, which says, "Not all the smart people in the world work for us." And I think it's a very strong quote because even, no matter how innovative you are as an organization, there's still so many smart people out there, who could actually somehow contribute to your innovation process as well. So if I look at one example here, it's one of the early examples of Procter & Gamble. It's one of my favorite examples, and I'll say in a minute why that is so, which was an example where the story goes that basically in Procter & Gamble, they had this Pringles product, as you can see on the picture there, where basically the idea from a marketing area was, well, wouldn't it be nice if we can print like text or cartoons on this product, which, I think is a somehow nice idea, and people would be interested in buying that and so on. However, it turned out that from a research and development and R&D perspective, it was actually quite tricky to do that. You can imagine, of course, it has to be, it's an edible product, so you cannot just print anything on that product there. So they were trying to find a solution, but apparently weren't quite able to do so. And instead of abandoning the idea and putting it on the shelf, they actually decided to reach out to their external partners and networks to see, is there somebody out there who can maybe help us solve this problem? And it turned out that there was indeed a university professor in Bologna, actually, who also owned a bakery, who basically had a solution to this problem. He had already solved the problem, which meant that Procter & Gamble could sort of insource that solution for a fraction of the cost and time it would have cost them otherwise to do it by themselves. And the reason why this is one of my favorite examples, I mean, in this context, I think it's nice. It's the solution is coming from, first of all, from Italy, and then also from a university professor. So it means that sometimes we do have some other societal value as well. But mainly, of course, it's a nice example because it really shows the importance of reaching out to the smart people out there and the power of open innovation in that sense. Just a quick other example, which I like to mention as I worked several years in Denmark, is Lego, the toy company, where one early example is the Mindstorms product, which is basically a robot toolkit with combined hardware software, where it turned out that the users were starting, when they launched the products, users started to hack into the product, and not, the kids, which was maybe the primary market initially, but also, adult fans of Lego, as we call them now. And in the end, Lego was not quite sure how to, react to this kind of development, but they decided to embrace it. And I think it also, shaped their open innovation, trajectory by embracing the power of the community. A more recent example is Lego IDs, basically a crowdsourcing platform where anybody with a good idea for a Lego product, can submit it, and there's a whole process of voting, and then ultimately, the really good ideas get evaluated and selected and actually produced. And a lot of fun examples on the website in case you're interested as well. Final example is from Philips, as I move back to Eindhoven, here in my home country, the Netherlands, which is also a very good example of a company that has really embraced open innovation explicitly. They say, for example, on the one hand, they do inside out, or what you may call outbound open innovation. So they use their skills and resources and make them available to the world in terms of facility support, but also very much about intellectual property licensing. So leveraging the IP that you have in order to find external commercialization opportunities. They also engage in what they call outside in or inbound open innovation, which is really about drawing on the capacities of individuals, organizations, and even small startups, as they write, around the globe. So it's really about, leveraging, the capacity of all the smart people out there, and use that to accelerate your own innovation process. Now, what that looks like in a kind of a model, we often depict open innovation as this funnel model, where we basically say, on the one hand, you can do like what Philips did, have the sort of, the inside out process where you say, well, we have a lot of, valuable knowledge in-house. Some of it will go to our, current market, but some of it does not quite fit. So let's see if we can find external commercialization opportunities, through licensing or in other ways, finding partners, external partners, to commercialize, that knowledge that was initially developed in-house, but in a way that is outside of your firm boundaries. At the same time, we also saw Philips and the other examples engaging in outside in open innovation, which is basically about leveraging all the external ideas, knowledge, technologies, and using them to accelerate your own innovation process. And in some cases, including companies like Philips, really use a combination of these different modes of open innovation by combining knowledge inflows and outflows, for example, in alliances and other co-creation types of efforts. So in terms of defining open innovation, my definition would be that it's very much about distributed innovation process. So again, all the smart people out there, but in a way that organizations need to manage the knowledge flowing across their organizational boundaries. So knowledge inflows, knowledge outflows, for which they use different kinds of mechanisms. So pecuniary and non-pecuniary means sometimes, it may be about, selling licenses or rewarding a particular idea, but it may also be non-pecuniary. Sometimes you may freely reveal some of your knowledge because you think it will benefit you in other ways. Or sometimes you may also offer other types of benefits, like in the Lego case, which does have a monetary reward, but also, I think you would just be happy if your design is selected, of course. Now, and all of this needs to be in line with the organization business model. So in very simple terms, one way of looking at it, so if you compare a closed versus an open business model, on the one hand, it would be about creating new revenue streams. If you go to an open business model, licensing, spinning off firms, and so on. And on the other hand, it would be about leveraging, external developments and thereby saving cost and time in your innovation process. Now, this, of course, sounds all very good and nice. You may think, well, is there no limits to it? Well, of course, there are also limits to this. And in fact, it's quite a well-known finding in our research that in a way, if you look, for example, at the outside in or inbound process of open innovation, it's very well established that, to some extent, if you reach out to more external sources of knowledge for your innovation process, initially your innovation performance goes up, but at some point it starts to go down again because it's, for example, just too much to manage all those external sources. So there's an optimal point. So it also means that there are some limits in how, to what extent this works. Now, on that kind of basis, we also been looking at, okay, how can we actually understand this process of open innovation. And from that, we developed this open innovation process model, where we basically have also seen, in practical examples and in the research, that there are these different phases in which organizations can engage when they open up, to external sources of knowledge, which goes from first obtaining the knowledge from outside and integrating it into the organization's own innovation processes, and ultimately, of course, commercializing it in order to implement it and benefit from it. So just to give you a few points about what this is all about, what we also know from the literature. In this first phase, it's very much about the examples that I mentioned, right? Like with Lego, Procter & Gamble, Philips, and there are many other ones, of course. Where it's really about how do you find this external information? How do you search for it? You need to source it, make sure you have mechanisms to filter the right ideas from maybe the bad ones, and then finding ways to acquire the knowledge from outside. Now, there are many different kinds of tools and toolkits, crowdsourcing platforms and those kinds of things, and we know quite a bit about it. And there are many ways to engage with external sources. But what you often see also in organizations is that just opening up the boundaries is really only half of the story. The difficulties often start when you want to integrate this knowledge that is coming from outside. Now, there may be many issues that are at stake here, but for example, you need to have the right organizational structure to be able to actually integrate the knowledge from the outside. Many organizations still have the kind of silos that may mean you get knowledge out, from the outside in at one part of the organization, but it doesn't really trickle down to the rest of the organization. Or they may have a culture that is actually rejecting ideas from the outside. This is the well-known not invented here syndrome, for example, where the problem really is that, especially in very innovative companies and other organizations, you are supposed to be the one who comes up with the great ideas, and the people working there may actually not be too keen on getting ideas from the outside because they are supposed to be the ones who innovate. So then you really have a kind of a mindset and a culture that rejects those ideas from the outside, and that's of course not really facilitating integrating external ideas, throughout the organization. We also know that the notion of absorptive capacity is very important. So you need to have prior knowledge in order to understand the knowledge that's coming in from the outside. So this is, of course, also important. So you still need to have a way in which you can actually connect knowledge coming from the outside to your internal processes. And there are many, there are several other capabilities that you need to think about. How does it fit with an open innovation model? Along the same lines, when you have a commercialization process, that requires particular capabilities. It's kind of still open question if you ask me, also based on the literature, what are the specific capabilities you need to commercialize internally or externally developed innovations. So I think that is still an important question and something to consider in terms of how do those kinds of capabilities actually allow you to also benefit from open innovation compared to a more closed innovation logic, so to say. A key element here really is this notion of business model. So it's really the logic or the framework that an organization uses to create and capture value. And obviously in an open innovation world, it's not only you who is creating the value, you're creating value together with others, but you're also sharing the value that is being captured across different stakeholders. So it's a different kind of logic, and it really needs to fit with this overall process. Now, this is kind of the overview that I wanted to sketch, and also highlight that, well, you may also consider that this is a nice linear model, but of course in practice, there are more interactions, especially in kind of a co-creation or when you work with communities. Also in the organization, it's not always a fully linear model, so it's a very dynamic thing, and that's, I think, also something that is important to remember. Also when we do our research on this topic, but also when we want to implement open innovation models in practice to understand the complexity of that. Another element of the complexity that I wanted to highlight is the fact that I talk very much now about open innovation at the organizational level, but we also need to consider that open innovation matters across different units of analysis. So we can talk about the organization and the business model and so on, but it's also very important to think about what is actually happening inside the organization. What is the role of the individuals? How do individual employees, for example, their characteristics matter in the way that the organization or the firm can be open and benefit from openness. And the same for other issues like how do you set up innovation projects? What about the organization in terms of functional areas and business units? How does it facilitate or hamper the organization to be open? Plus, I think we need to look beyond the organization by considering, well, what are actually the external stakeholders that play a role in open innovation? What about the networks and ecosystems that we engage in? And even thinking about, the industry, like in this context, very much also the cultural creative industries, which has particular characteristics which are different from other industries. So what does it mean for the extent to which and the way in which open innovation works better or worse? And similarly for different kinds of regions, of course, in the Interact context, I think also very important because the region also really matters as a a conditional factor that determines the way in which open innovation may work better or worse. And even reaching out to more sort of societal level in terms of a government, but also citizen involvement, public policy in general, and even the societal challenges that we'll also raise, I think, a little bit in the introduction, are all issues that you need to consider in order to understand the full picture of what open innovation is and how it may matter. So from that, we also started to develop, a research agenda to think about what are really the issues that are useful to think about in the future. So where is this research maybe going? Just a few examples here are that on the one hand, when you look at also individual level characteristics, thinking about behavior and cognition are important issues that we need to consider in order to understand not only how individuals are open for innovation, but then how does it link to the organizational level openness. We also need to think about the role of strategy and design in terms of business models and entrepreneurial opportunities. We need to understand the role of the particular stakeholders, such as communities and users that are involved in open innovation processes. I think the ecosystem is a very important unit of analysis, both in general, understanding how collection or a network of different partners can actually co-create a value proposition in a way they cannot do independently, but that also has implications for what kind of platforms, digital platforms, crowd-based platforms that you can actually use to implement open innovation. Plus, I think a final point here is that I think we can really look beyond, think about issues like open governance in terms of the role of government, smart cities, other regional initiatives that play a role in this kind of way. Then just to summarize some of this, I would say that when we want to look at open innovation, I think we need to understand some of the complexity and see how we can connect some of the dots. So when we look at an organization as trying to implement open innovation, we know on the one hand that it's important to think about some of the structural elements, such as the organization design and other characteristics of the firm, but also the dynamics of the innovation process as such, which is something that will also develop over time, which then on the one hand has links to what are the characteristics of the organization, for example, individual level or other intra-organizational issues that will affect the openness of the organization on the one hand, and on the other hand, we need to think about how is this all embedded in the broader value network, the broader ecosystem, or even beyond in terms of industry, regional context. How does it link to the larger challenges we want to address? And this is quite a complex set of factors, of course, which is a challenge, but the opportunity then also lies in how we can understand this complexity and link these elements across different levels of analysis to really implement sort of a holistic and integrative process in which open innovation can indeed benefit stakeholders across these different levels, also across different industries. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope this gave a nice overview of some of the elements of what open innovation is and where we are going from a research perspective, but where I also think in practice we need to go in order to create a better situation for different stakeholders and society at large. So